Hey everyone, it's LS, and this is the Tempo Storm patch 8.4 solo queue tier list. As with previous tier lists, this one is made with the assumption that you commit to playing the champions more than just 10 games, and that you also look up people that are playing the champions at a high MMR, and also research the proper build orders and builds for the champions that you are playing. As with all my tier lists, if you don't see a champion on the tier list, it either means that I don't think that there is any point in putting it on the list, or that it's too unique to accurately determine where it fits in. Also remember to keep in mind that Diamond 2 and above shares a tier list with Masters. Now let's get into some of the main talking points for the tier list. One of the things that you will still be noticing inside of this tier list is that Annie's lane kingdom is as good as ever. She is still the champion that you should be picking up in mid or even top lane if you are low MMR and looking to climb very quickly and also improve your game too while you're at it. Moving on from Annie, another champion that he's actually a lot better now than he was before is Darius. He's not necessarily returning to the tier list, he has been seen on other tier lists that I've made in the past, but his strength is definitely improved, and I think that he's in a lot better spot than he was before. So even while you still see him in some of the S tiers, his strength is stronger than he was in previous S tiers. ADC things that I want to talk about that you'll notice at the higher MMR is the Xayah&Rakan icons which you're looking at. Some people might be wondering what exactly does it mean. Basically, I'm under the impression that Xayah and Rakan together are an S-tier duo. However, without Xayah, Rakan is non-existent on my tier list, but without Rakan, Xayah I still believe is an A or a B tier ADC. I think that Xayah and Rakan are totally underappreciated right now, especially in Western regions, and I think that they're a duo dynamic which a lot of people should be utilizing more. So if you're duoing with someone at this MMR, definitely look to pick up Xayah&Rakan, especially with some of the new improvisions that some people have been coming up with, like going Exhaust Ignite on Rakan level 1 with Spellbook, and just looking for those early Xayah&Rakan cheeses. Now it's time for some new kids on the block. You'll notice that even at the bronze tier, Varus&Kog'Maw have finally showed up, and normally these spots were always just reserved for basically Misfortune, Ashe, Lucian in the past, and some other champions a long time ago. Nowadays, I think that the itemization and just the help that Varus&Kog'Maw have received since I last made a tier list, which I believe was 7.10, these champions are just absolute monsters, and they're so simple, especially given the fact that you can basically just stand still and dish out damage. Their itemization paths are really, really good, and they have a very, very good time in the meta right now, so picking them up is actually, I think, going to be more favorable than taking even Ashe now at this point. So you'll notice that as you begin to go up in MMR, you'll start to see them slowly move up, and then they'll basically be a placeholder all the way up until the highest MMRs, where they eventually become God tier. Speaking about some new kids on the block, let's also talk about Sion. Sion's a champion that he's been popping up now recently, even at the highest MMRs, but with the new runes that came in Season 8, Sion's just actually causing a lot of chaos up in top lane. He's a champion that is really, really safe, he can bully extremely hard, and it's just really difficult to play against him for opponents, and it can be really frustrating. He's a champion that you should definitely be looking into if you're looking for a tank to play up in top lane that it's virtually impossible to lose a lane with. And as far as losing lanes go, let's talk about a champion that he is on the tier list, but I really had to push myself to even put him on here, and that's Swain. Swain's rework was a complete failure, at least in my opinion. I think that Swain is, for the most part, a pretty terrible champion, but he's not too terrible to where I'm not going to put him on the list. His skills are pretty basic, and he does offer the ability to wave clear pretty easily. That being said, his ultimate is still kind of like his old ultimate, and if players don't respect it, which they likely won't at low MMR, Swain can be problematic. He does have his W, which can be used to avoid ganks and stuff, but he's not going to be the most impactful or strongest champion, but I do still think that he's better than some other champions that I could have slotted in here. So in regards to Swain, let's talk about another champion that was often almost always seen with him up in the top lane, and that's Vladimir. Vladimir is a champion that is completely out of control right now. I think he's extremely strong at basically every single tier. He has good itemization right now, he has a lot of good matchups, and I think that he's pretty forgiving even at lower MMRs. I know that some of his combos and his engages could be pretty difficult to pull off, but even still, I think that because of how forgiving he is, he's a champion that you should look to pick up, especially if you want an AP carry champion that can be virtually impossible to move. Unchained no longer, Volibear is back and healthy on my tier list, as he received a lot of love, most recently in the patch notes, and he's making a pretty triumphant return to the tier list, and he's gonna be a champion that you want to pick up at low MMR, and it can go all the way up until the highest MMRs, where I do genuinely believe he does start to fall off. But he's a nice champion that I'm recommending that people can begin to actually give a little bit of love to, and this is also helping out in the jungler department, which was a little bit stale, especially in my previous tier lists. Moving on to a little bit more of a unique champion that you're probably wondering why is on the tier list. Mord's return to the simple tiers is not something that you should be too surprised about. He's gotten some itemization help in recent patches, and he's also just a champion that's really simple, and he's very oppressive. If you take some time to learn his rotations inside of the game, learn how to properly build him, and then learn how to play out and bully some of his matchups, he's going to be a champion that will probably net you a lot of wins just because people don't respect his ghost or his heal. A lot of people are probably wondering what that icon actually is and if that's even a champion or something, but it is indeed, and it's Karthus. Karthus is a champion that isn't getting the attention that he deserves, and I think in solo queue, with his ability to help out side lanes, just pick up random kills and assists using his ultimate, and the ability to give in to the ARAM or just go completely ham inside of teamfights and dish out enormous amounts of damage, is really being undervalued right now. Karthus got a lot of help with the new itemization changes, and yeah, he got hit a little bit by the runes, but I don't think it's enough to take him out, and I think with the way that the meta is looking across the board, Karthus is not as bad as what people are thinking. He's gonna probably take a little bit of time, and I don't expect anyone, even with 10 to 15 games, to be able to hit tons of his Qs, but I don't think that you need to make him an effective pick. Rounding off something that I'm sure some people might be really surprised by is actually Zyra support. Zyra is a champion that I think received actually a lot of love with some of the itemization changes and also the runes that came in Season 8. I think that people aren't giving her as much credit as a support as she should be receiving, and I do think that she's a champion that you should definitely look into if you're looking to really catch your opponents off guard and then also carry games from the support role as basically a second AP carry. Finishing off some of the talking points of something that I mentioned way earlier on is actually the god tier for the Varus&Kog'Maw. Some people might be thinking that I'm really overestimating just how strong Varus&Kog'Maw are, but honestly, in solo queue, they're just so out of control. The way that they can itemize and the way that they can enable their double AP teammates from top and mid lane by giving them that extra little bit of penetration with the wit's end, and also how they can just be so tanky in the mid game against mages right now is so much of a problem for people to deal with. They ramp up, they never slow down, and they're almost always going to be useful after their first item. And so few ADCs can actually offer that kind of raw power in the game right now. Just go out and pick Varus and Kog'Maw and commit to playing them just a few games and watch how their power just saves you from so many situations. As with my last tier list, I want to talk about some of the absent champions. Some people might be wondering, where's Ryze, where's Azir, where's LeBlanc, where are other champions like this? I don't think that Azir is a champion that a random master or a challenger player is just going to pick up and suddenly be able to pilot in 10, 15, 20, 25 games and somehow have that champion be more useful or better than some of the other champions that are on the list. I acknowledge that Azir is one of the best champions in the game and he's basically a staple in pro play, but I don't think he belongs in solo queue. Obviously, the same thought process is actually going for Ryze. Ryze is a champion that you really have to know how you're playing the lane, how to bully, how to space, how to zone, how to do all of these things to really tap into Ryze's power and make him the monster that he is. So even though he received some love, especially with the new mid lane mage items, I don't think that he's a champion that you want to be picking over some of the other champions on this list, unless you're an academy or professional player, in which case this list isn't really that applicable to you. Champion like LeBlanc. LeBlanc's a champion that I think, again, is really undervalued right now in competitive, but this isn't a competitive tier list. So with that being said, I don't think that someone should actually have to stress and go out of their way to learn how to play LeBlanc to make her the 1v9 monster that she can actually be. Other absent champions from this list, again, as I talked about at the very beginning of this video, either they're way too difficult to accurately determine where I should have placed them in on the list, or I just don't think that they're nearly as good as some of the other champions available, and I didn't want to completely water down the list by just including tons of champions. I thought pretty hard, and I talked with many challenger players while making this list, and a lot of the end conclusions on some champions that you're just not seeing basically came down to why even pick them if this champion's already here. So that's it for the 8.4 tier list. As always, I will be hosting a stream on my Twitch channel where I will answer questions with the chat, talk about some of the placements of champions that you're seeing on the list, and then also just talk about maybe even some champions that didn't make the list and give further reasoning why they didn't make the list in detail for the people that are curious about them. Hope that you guys enjoyed the list, and another one will definitely come in the future. I promise it will not be next year or in Season 9 that the next tier list will come, and you can be sure that Annie will still be on that list.